So you've been into cryonics. Basically, you've signed up to have your brain frozen when you reach death. There, you're pulling out your what is that? Your cryonic dog tag?
Alert tag. Yeah.
Nice.
It tells them somebody should call them up if there's a need.
So talk to us. You're going to have your brain frozen when you die. I think Ted Williams did the same thing, by the way. So along with a lot of other people. So talk to us about
not a lot, actually, not very many at all.
Really?
That's the surprising thing. So
talk to us about that. Yeah.
So the key idea is that when current medical science gives up on you, we can let worms eat you, or we can freeze you in the hope that future medical technology will be able to revive you. Now, we're not talking future in 5 years, we're talking 50 or 100 years later.
Yeah.
That might not happen, but the continued growth of the world economy and technology suggests that it's a good bet. The more likely failure is that somehow your frozen brain won't be preserved until that future date when you could be revived, perhaps, and fixed. I have this book called The Age of M, Work, Love, and Life When Robots Rule the Earth, and it's a scenario about brain emulations, and you'd have a shot at becoming a brain emulation in that future world if you are cryonically frozen. Yeah. It's not going to be easy to unfreeze you, and it may be, in fact, turning you into a brain emulation is the main thing that would be possible later. But the key point is it costs a modest amount of money, and it gives you this chance of a future revival. Now, there's other thing you can do that costs about the same thing that about the same number of people do, which is to have your ashes thrown into space. And we all know that that's not going to bring you back.
Right.
And some people do that. It's kind of weird. And their spouses are okay with it. It's kind of quirky, but okay. But a lot of people's spouses really hate cryonics. And that's kind of interesting because, again, it costs about the same amount of money, about the same number of people do it, and it has very little chance of working. So apparently what bothers people about cryonics is the thought that you think it might work.
Yeah. Either that or maybe your spouse doesn't want you to come back.
Well, I think it's sort of a betrayal and abandonment thing. You're willing to come back without them is the story. And in some sense, that's not true for the ashes into space, but that's an interesting fact about human behavior. So the most striking thing about cryonics is if you do surveys, large fractions of people think, yeah, that kind of makes sense. If you look at the actual number of people who've done it, it's even the number of people who signed up for it is less than 3,000. And the number of people it's ever been done to is less than 300.
Really? Wow.
And it's gotten free international publicity for 50 years. So something is really big as a difference between the number of people who say they'd be willing to do it and the number of people who actually do it. There's this enormous chasm there.
Two books I want to recommend to you, one of which the title is not coming to my mind right now, but both approaching this from a kind of a scientific perspective and more of a philosophical perspective. So are you a Neil Stephenson fan? He's a science fiction writer.
Sure.
Okay, he wrote.
I've read many long ago, but I read many of his books. Yes.
All right, he's got a book that he wrote pretty recently, and when I say that, I think within the last 2 years, and it's called Fall. I think it's called Fall or Dodge in Hell, and it's about exactly.
I read that one. Yes, I read that.
So isn't that an interesting scientific exploration of kind of what you're talking about? Like, what happens? Could you upload consciousness into a computer?
So there was also a recent TV show that came out on Netflix, I think, or Amazon called Uploads.
Yeah.
And so it had a similar theme to that book, which is it focused on if you could come back and have your brain be emulated, it would be like a heaven or hell.
Yeah.
And so the usual story framing is that this is sort of a replacement for a religious heaven or hell. It's a way to sort of actually make a heaven or hell for people's brains. And I think that just misses the main thing, which is this isn't a heaven or hell, it's a real world. And so, for example, in the book, in the TV show Uploads, they make it a rule that you're not allowed to work in this world. So you have to pay for it ahead of time, and then it's luxury all the way afterwards. But of course, in reality, I think what happens is that they work, and this becomes the main world where people do things and work. It's not a side heaven or hell, it's the new world.
Yeah. There's another book by, I think he's a Dutch philosopher. I'll find the book and I'll send you an email about it. But basically, the idea behind this book from a philosophical standpoint is death, the ceasing of life, is what gives a meaning to everything. And without death, there's essentially no meaning. There's no reason to do anything. Like, in other words, if we were immortal, we would have no motivation to do anything. Like, being immortal would be terrible. And that's the basic
I mean,
philosophical argument on that.
there isn't any realistic chance of eliminating death.
Yeah.
It's all about the rate
Yeah.
of death.
Yeah.
So obviously, there are mayflies who last a month and they die quickly. We aren't mayflies. Would our life be more valuable as mayflies? I don't think so.
Yeah.
We live a long time relative to mayflies, but a short time compared to cosmology.
Yeah.
So even if we lived 1,000,000 years, we would still die, and life can still have meaning because there's an eventual death. So it seems to me that if you, I don't want to argue about whether death gives meaning to life, because there really is no prospect of not having death. The lack of death scenario is just not a scenario that can work. It's just all about how long is plausible to go before you die.